Hi all. Today I'm going to walk you through a short lecture on identifying the parts of arguments, and we're going to work through some practice problems, and there'll be some quiz questions mixed in with the practice problems, so make sure you have a notepad and a pen because the quiz questions, when you get to the quiz on Canvas, it won't give you the question on Canvas. The questions will come from here, so you'll need to write down the answers so you can get the correct answer on the quiz when you open it on Canvas after you watch this. So let's talk about identifying the parts of arguments. There are a few steps here. First, you want to look for conclusion and premise indicator words. I'll show you a list of those in just a second. And if there are no indicator words, then what you're going to try to do is identify the conclusion by adding your own indicator words and see if the premises support your proposed conclusion. If what you think are the premises seem to support the conclusion after you add indicator words, then it's likely that you got the conclusion right. And if there are no indicator words, the conclusion is usually the first statement. That's just the normal way we talk. So let's look at some indicator words first, and then we'll try some practice problems. So here's a list of conclusion indicator and premise indicator words. So these words function in a similar way as an indicator would on your car, right? So when you want to indicate where you're going to take the car, you use your signal to indicate whether you're going to turn right or left. Similarly, in an argument, you'll see these conclusion indicator words or premise indicator words to show you where the argument is going. So the argument will, if it includes these words, will show you how it's moving from premises to the conclusion. So let's take a look at some popular conclusion indicator words. Therefore is very popular, maybe the most popular conclusion indicator. Wherefore, thus, consequently. If we skip around a little bit, you'll see words like hence and so. It follows that. All of these are going to be big red flags for you that the information that you're about to see is likely to be the conclusion. So then moving down to premise indicator words, we see words like since, as indicated by, because, for, if we skip around a little bit, as, or given that, or owing to. So if you see these words, they should be a red flag that the information that you're about to see is going to act as a premise or a reason that the author believes that you should believe the conclusion. So using these words as sort of like a roadmap to arguments, let's look at a couple arguments and see if we can identify their parts, the conclusion and the premises. So here's the first argument. Since the oak tree provides the most shade and the grass underneath it is not wet, it follows that we should picnic under the oak tree. So the first thing we want to do is scan the argument for indicator words. And right off the bat, we see this word since. Let me underline that for us. All right, so we see that word since, and we look at our list of indicator words, and we see that since is a premise indicator. So it's likely that the information that comes after that will be a premise. So we have two statements that come after that. The oak tree provides the most shade. And the second statement, the grass underneath it is not wet. So those are likely to be premises. Then we look for more indicator words, and we get this phrase, it follows that. And we look at our chart of indicator words, and we see that it's one of the conclusion indicator words, so the information that comes after it follows that is likely to be the conclusion. So then we have two premises. The oak tree provides the most shade, first premise. The second premise, the grass underneath it is not wet. And then we get the conclusion. Those are reasons to believe the conclusion. We should picnic under the oak tree. So premise, conclusion. All right, so let's take a look at another example here. Because the light is either on or off, and since it is not on, we may infer that it must be off. So again, same process. We look for indicator words. Here we have the word because, and we look at our list of indicator words, and we see that that's a premise indicator. So because the light is either on or off, and since it is not on, so it looks like we're looking at two premises, and then we get this phrase, we may infer that. We look at our list of indicator words, and we see we may infer. So we may infer that as a conclusion indicator word, so the conclusion is it must be off. With the premises being the light is either on or off, that's one premise, and since it is not on, we must infer that it must be off. So again, two premises and a conclusion. All right, so here's the first quiz question. Now that you know how to use premise and conclusion indicator words to find premises and conclusions, this will be the first question on your quiz. What's the conclusion of argument number 1? Argument number 1 says, seeing that Steph Curry is the greatest shooter in basketball history, it must be that he is the best player in the NBA today. So the quiz question, when you open it on Canvas, will give you a variety of conclusions. For now, write down the conclusion on your notes. And then when you open the quiz, select the answer that corresponds to the conclusion of this argument for quiz question number 1. All right, so let's look at some more examples here. Up to this point, we've looked at examples where you had both premise indicator and conclusion indicator words. But let's take a look at an argument where you don't have both, but how much just one indicator word can tell you. So here's the argument. Babies are illogical. Nobody is despised who can manage a crocodile. Illogical persons are despised. Therefore, babies cannot manage crocodiles. So again, first step, we look for indicator words. We see that we have only one indicator word, and that word is therefore. And we look to see if it's a premise or conclusion indicator. Therefore is a conclusion indicator. So the information that comes after it is likely to be the conclusion. So babies cannot manage crocodiles. That is the conclusion of this argument. So then let's see if the rest of the information in this passage can be thought of as reasons to support that conclusion. So babies are illogical. That would give us some support that they can't manage crocodiles. Nobody's despised who can manage a crocodile. If we fit that premise together with the other information, that illogical persons are despised and babies are illogical, all of those together will provide support for the conclusion that babies cannot manage crocodiles. So here we have 1, 2, 3 premises leading to one conclusion. And look at all the information we got just from that word therefore. So we didn't have any premise indicator words, but the therefore let us identify the conclusion, and then we could figure out if the other information lent support to the conclusion and if they were all premises. All right, let's look at another argument in this vein. So it is vitally important that wilderness areas be preserved, for wilderness provides essential habitat for wildlife, including endangered species, and it is a natural retreat from the stress of daily life. So again, we look for indicator words, we scan the argument, and we see this word for. We look at our list of indicator words, and we see that for is a premise indicator. So what we're likely to see after the premise indicator word is are going to be premises, right? So Wilderness provides essential habitat for wildlife, including endangered species, and it is a natural retreat from the stress of daily life. Those are likely to be premises that would support the conclusion it's vitally important that wilderness areas be preserved. So let's see if that works. Wilderness provides essential habitat for wildlife, including endangered species. That seems like a reason why wilderness areas should be preserved, right? Also, it's a natural retreat from the stress of daily life. That's another good reason that wilderness areas should be preserved. So it works out that the conclusion is first, and then we get that word for, and then we see two premises after that. Again, note how much we can do with just this word for. So we just have one premise indicator, and with that one premise indicator, we're able to figure out that this argument has two premises and a conclusion that comes before the premise indicator. All right, so indicator words are really valuable when you're trying to determine the structure of an argument. They're especially handy if, like me, you struggle with some of the advanced vocabulary that you'll often find in your college textbooks, in academic articles, or the examples that you'll find in the test in this class. The way you can use indicator words will be really helpful because you don't even need to understand all of the words in the argument. As long as you can flag the indicator words, you can identify the different parts of the argument. So let's take a look at an argument composed of nonsense words, and we can see how we can do that. So this argument says, we can only conclude yada, 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 since hyphy, 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 and stunna, 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 stunna. Now, we have no idea what those words mean, except for we do have some indicator words. So let's look at those indicator words. We can only conclude is the first phrase we get, and we look to see we may conclude is a conclusion indicator. So here we can only conclude. It's going to indicate the conclusion, and we keep scanning for indicator words, and we come upon this word since. And since we see is a premise indicator. And then we have and. So now we see that what comes after we can only conclude is going to be the conclusion. So the conclusion here is yada, 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 yada. And there are two premises here. One is hyphy, 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 hyphy. And the other stunna, 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 stunna. So now you can use these indicator words even when you have nonsense words for premises and conclusions, but also if you have complex words as premises and conclusions, even some words that are difficult or that you might not understand. Keeping that in mind, let's look at quiz question number 2. So again, write the conclusion down of this argument, and when you open the quiz on Canvas, it will prompt you to select the answer that is the conclusion of quiz question number 2. So here's the argument. It is a fact that major life forms now on Earth were not at all represented in the past. There were no birds or mammals 250 million years ago. It is a fact that major life forms of the past are no longer living. There used to be dinosaurs and Pithecanthropus, and there are none now. It is a fact that all living forms came from previously living forms. Therefore, all present forms of life arose from ancestral forms that were different. Now, if you're like me, your eyes bounce off of some of these words, and there are some new words for me, but we can still use indicator words to identify premises and conclusion. For this quiz question, identify the conclusion of this argument. All right, so now what do we do when there are no indicator words? Let's take a look at an argument here. Some over-the-counter medicine should not be given to very young children. For example, cold medicines contain decongestants and antihistamines. These substances raise blood pressure and heart rate. If an overdose should occur in a young child, the result can be fatal. So we scan for indicator words. We see this word for, but it comes with for example. So that won't count as a clean indicator word with just the word for. So we don't have great indicator words here. So we're going to have to look at what the statements say and try to figure out which statements support the other statement. So generally the way we talk, recall the hint at the beginning of the lecture, generally the way we talk if we don't use indicator words is that the conclusion is the first statement of the argument. And this argument seems to be no exception. The first statement is some over-the-counter medicine should not be given to very young children. And then the rest of the paragraph gives some examples of bad things that could be in medicines and the way children could react to those bad things. So all of those seem to be, all of the latter sentences seem to be reasons to support the first sentence. And recall also at the beginning of the lecture I said, if there are no indicator words, one way you can try to figure out if what you think is the conclusion is actually the conclusion is by adding your own indicator words. So let's try to do that here. So we are suspecting that the first sentence is the conclusion here. So let's add a therefore. Before the first sentence. And let's add a since here. So we add a, we add a conclusion indicator before what we think is the conclusion and a premise indicator before what we think is premise. And now let's try to read it back. Premises first. Since, for example, cold medicines contain decongestants and antihistamines, and these substances raise blood pressure and heart rate, and if an overdose should occur in a young child, the result can be fatal. Therefore, some over-the-counter medicine should not be given to very young children. And if we read those indicator words back in, the paragraph makes sense, right? So we see for this paragraph, the conclusion is the first statement, and then we have 3 premises. All right, let's try another example like this. So the argument reads as follows. The 2017-2018 Golden State Warriors have the most talented roster of players ever assembled. Steve Kerr is a fantastic coach. They will certainly be 2018 NBA champions. Now, again, we have no indicator words, right? So we have to try to figure out, guess what the conclusion is, and then insert our own indicator words to see if we've made the right choice. So as I told you before, when there are no indicator words, the conclusion is often the first statement. The first statement here is the 2017-2018 Golden State Warriors have the most talented roster of players ever assembled. So just for the sake of example, let's predict that that will be the conclusion and add some indicator words and see if that works as the conclusion. So let's add a thus there. And then the other statements will have to be premises. So let's add a since here. And let's see if that will work. So we read it back. Since Steve Kerr is a fantastic coach, and they will certainly be 2018 NBA champions, thus the Golden State Warriors have the most talented roster of players ever assembled. That doesn't exactly make sense, right? The fact that Steve Kerr is a fantastic coach gives us no indication that the Warriors have the most talented roster of players ever assembled. So something went wrong here. So let's try again with a different, let's take another one of these statements as the conclusion. All right, so we saw that the first statement doesn't make sense as a conclusion, so it's probably going to be a premise, right? So if it's not going to be the first statement, the most logical place for the conclusion to be is the last statement. So let's try that as the conclusion. So we'll write in some indicator words again. Since the 2017-2018 Golden State Warriors have the most talented roster of players ever assembled, and Steve Kerr is a fantastic coach, therefore, let's use thus because it's shorter. Thus, they will certainly be 2018 NBA champions. And let's see if that makes sense. So if the Warriors have the most talented roster of players ever assembled, and they also have a great coach, those are two good reasons why we should suspect that they're going to win the NBA championship next year. And this way of looking at the argument makes sense. So again, when you're looking at arguments with no indicator words, you want to try to guess what the conclusion is. You should suspect the first statement. And then try to throw in some premise and conclusion indicator words. If the premise and conclusion indicator words work the way you put them, then it's likely that your guess for what the conclusion was correct. If they don't, then try again, trial and error, right? So now, for the final quiz question. What's the conclusion of the following argument? The consequences of violence for children are very often grave and damaging. Violence may result in greater susceptibility to lifelong social, emotional, and cognitive impairments. Related mental health and social problems include anxiety and depressive disorders, hallucinations, impaired work performance, memory disturbances, and aggressive behavior. Early exposure to violence is also associated with later lung, heart, and liver disease, fetal death during pregnancy, and suicide attempts. All right, so again, follow the steps. Try to throw in your own indicator words and see if it works out. And this will be the final quiz question for this lecture about finding the parts of arguments. Write down the conclusion on your paper, and when you open the Canvas quiz and you get to question number 3, select the one that corresponds to the conclusion of this argument. All right, now just to review what we've learned how to identify the parts of arguments. First, the first step you should make, look for conclusion and premise indicator words. As we've seen, those are really handy in identifying the various parts of an argument. If you can find even one indicator word, you can often figure out all the different parts of the argument and how they relate to one another. But if there are no indicator words, all hope is not lost. Try to identify the conclusion by adding your own indicator words and see if your proposed premises support your proposed conclusion. And if they do, it's likely that you identified the correct conclusion and the premises correctly as well. Also, if there are no indicator words, the conclusion is almost always the first statement. That's just the way that we talk. But again, try the indicator words to double check that general rule of thumb. All right, thanks for listening. See you next time.